Hello, guys, and welcome to another edition of CastCast, where I am your host, Cassidy Streeter. Today, we will be picking the Sunday games for Week 7 of the NFL season. Obviously, starting off with London. We have our Rams playing the Jaguars. Essentially, kind of a game to me that could be somewhat interesting. Obviously, both of these teams are 4-2. They have very respectful records going into this week, but still each team has had their own struggles. For me personally, I think it's odd that you have the Rams that are traveling on Saturday. That's obviously a huge headline with this. Yes, they have a good amount of veterans. Yes, they, have all, more than likely, most of them traveled here before. But you kind of look at this, this team, and they don't have Puka Nakua. He has been ruled out. So you're talking about, the Matthew Stafford, Devontae Adams show. And then, Jordan Whittington obviously gets, elevated to being that wide receiver 2 with Tutu Atwell still in the slot. Now, speaking of the Jaguars, obviously coming off kind of a difficult loss last week. But to me, I think that this team, now that Trayvon Walker is healthy, and obviously they're obviously going to London, to play the Los Angeles Rams, where it's essentially a home game for Jacksonville, and they've had a very good time over there putting teams away. The thing that I'll say that is worrisome about their team is that you have Devin Lloyd is injured. So you're talking about Oluokun and Dennis Gardeck holding down the fort, and then, Ventrell Miller, assuming as he is the backup for, Devin Lloyd, playing obviously a first round pick. Or I'm sorry, Ventrell Miller, not a first round pick, but picked up a couple of years ago. So still rather young, but albeit that he will be getting his, feet wet in this game while not having a lot of production, which worries me. Obviously, we all know that the Rams have a very good run game over in London. I think it's going to be very important that they channel into that. And with that being said, I'm kind of looking at this game, but I honestly do think that Jacksonville is kind of due for a bounce back. And for whatever reason with the Rams, I'm just not overly convinced. Last week they did kind of struggle against Baltimore, and while Baltimore played better, they just didn't really put the team away. So I feel like Jacksonville, they have a good defense, and and overall they should be a lot better with their pass rush being better. And I just wonder if the Rams are going to be able to kind of compete with the Jaguars. And yes, I am actually saying that because I think that while their defense is good, I think that in all honesty, I think their DB room has, kind of gotten a little bit exposed in the past. So I am actually rolling with Jacksonville in this game, despite, them being the underdogs in this game. Moving on, we have Saints versus the Bears. Now, the Saints, interestingly enough, have played close in most of their games. You kind of look at what their schedule's been like the last few weeks. They lost 25-19 against New England. Rattler throwing for 227. New York, which we, have all kind of seen that, hey, they've been kind of on the rise the last few games. They were able to beat and force a lot of turnovers, where Rattler threw for over 200. But then they lost to Buffalo, where you kind of look at that game where it's like you lose by 12, but you're able to kind of keep the game in perspective for most of the game. Rattler didn't do too well. But Seattle, 44-13, Rattler threw for over 200. He's had over 200 passing yards in every single one of their games this year, besides Buffalo. which is obviously a very, very tough place to play. Now, I get that this is at Chicago, but the point I'm trying to make here, I guess, with Spencer Rattler is he's played very sound football, and they have a good number of weapons on this team where Kamara's doing well, Miller's doing well, Rattler is actually rushing for a good number of yards. The team as a whole is averaging 4 yards a carry, and even receiving wise, they're averaging 8.8 a reception. So I overall like the Saints as, a huge underdog in this game, where defensively, I think that they're going to get a lot of pressure on Caleb Williams. I think that you have a couple of notable guys like Cameron Jordan and Granderson on that, on as defensive ends for the pass rush of the Saints. Obviously, would kind of hope that Chase Young would have more of effect, but obviously he's been very limited this year with an injury. So, and looking at this team, though, I personally think that, like, eventually Chase Young is going to, kind of emerge and pop off. I personally, even though many people don't really believe in the Saints, I think that their record just kind of is worse than how they've played, and that they've been keeping these games close. Obviously, with the Bears in their last 2 games, as we all know, it's been a 25-24 score, and you kind of look at, their win over the Commanders, and the Commanders just kind of let them do what they want. Or the Bears do what they want, where they would dump it off to Swift, or they would hand it off to Swift, and he had a phenomenal game. Now, I do not think it's going to be that easy for the Bears this week. And DeAndre Swift is, questionable with an injury, so he's a little banged up after his impressive performance. Looking at this team, at the Bears, they've been doing a good job of protecting Caleb, and he's been passing it a little bit more on time. But to me, there is times when you see him stutter, you see him hold onto the ball too long. And I just think that New Orleans has always been able to get a good amount of pressure and essentially be able to get a lot of hits alone on the QB, to where I think that because of the lack of run game that the Bears have, you can say all you want about, they ran against the Commanders, but the Commanders haven't had a good run D. I think that it's going to fall to Caleb, and I think it's really going to be hard for him to do a lot. And especially when you talk about, I think that the corners that they have on this New Orleans team, I think Kool-Aid McKinstry's been doing well. Alontae Taylor been doing well. Isaac Yiadom is an interesting player, still young, but I personally think that it's going to be very tough on Caleb, and I think they're not going to really be able to pass down the field. I think Justin Reed is going to be able to have, a very good game against him. And if you come with the exotic packages, I think that's going to do enough to make Caleb worry. And that is why I am picking the Saints, even though I guess a lot of people are betting on the Bears because they've won 3 straight. Moving on, we have Cleveland and Miami. From what I've heard is the weather is actually going to be bad in Cleveland, and it's going to be raining, and it's going to be sloppy, and it's going to be muddy. Sounds like a true game where the Browns would win. I'm not really going to talk about this one that much. I think that we're either going to see the Dolphins coming out the gate really, really, really hot, or if they don't, they're really, 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 really going to struggle the whole game. I don't think A-Chain's going to be able to kind of carry them in this game. I think that speed is just always kind of a double-edged sword, and you look at the Cleveland Browns defense, they haven't really given up that much. And you look at kind of the speed on this defense, that Devin Bush, Schlesinger, they're just too fast, and that sideline to sideline speed, it's going to be hard to bust A-Chain loose. as he's probably not going to be able to run it up the field. The same thing with Darren Waller having played very, very well. I think that you've got Grant Delpit, Devin Bush, Weschinger, who's a good coverage man, and I think that he's not going to have as good of a game. I think that it really is going to come down to whether or not Miami can adjust their play style and use, someone else to do something, but I just don't see it with who they have on their team. And I think that they're really going to be able to get after Tua Tagovailoa this game, and it's just not going to be pretty. So I am actually picking the Browns to win this game. Moving on, we have Tennessee and the Patriots. So Tennessee, as we all know, fired their head coach Callahan on Tuesday, and this week they are going to be playing the Patriots, who have been playing very, very good football. Obviously, a close game against the Saints last week. And overall, they've been playing very, very gritty, and May is looking, like a very good star. 5 of his games so far, 4 of his games so far with 250 more passing yards or more. And, every game he's got over 200 passing yards. And I mean, they've been doing it with kind of a meager run game, in all honesty. They don't have a 100-yard rusher this season, you guys, which is interesting because when you think Patriots and you think young QB and you think Vrabel, you're going to be thinking rushing attack. But they haven't really been able to establish that, and they have a running back by committee on the Patriots. Now, I don't think that's really going to matter, as I've kind of seen how Tennessee has been getting exposed. I think that you look at the Patriots and Diggs has been playing well. Booty has been playing well. Mac Hollins, I think, is, a quiet security blanket. And obviously Hunter Henry, very good tight end. And this O-line has been staying consistent and been able to protect Drake May. But the thing that I think about with this defense is that they're going to be able to get after Cam Ward. They're going to be able to put him, on his back quite a lot. You don't have Calvin Ridley this game, so you're essentially running with Alec Ayamanor, a rookie they drafted this year, Van Jefferson, a journeyman, and DK, as your people, and Tyler Lockett, because Bryce Oliver, a backup, is also out. So they only have 4 wide receivers active for this game, which is just not good. And a running game that, to me, I think it's about time that you put Tyjae Spears as your starting running back. I don't think it's doing you any favors to have Pollard, who, don't get me wrong, is more likely, more of a receiving back and a third down back. I think it's time for Tyjae Spears to really be released. And, we'll kind of see, based on the head coach that's there, what kind of game plan he has. But I just don't see the Titans really being able to beat Drake May and the Patriots. I think that the D-line is somewhat underrated for the Patriots, and they've been doing a good job. I'm going with the Patriots for this game. Moving on, we have kind of a doozy of a game here. We have the Chiefs with Rashee Rice returning to make his debut after a 6-game suspension. And this is obviously the Kansas City Chiefs that were able to beat the Detroit Lions lastly handily without Rashee Rice. But looking at the Chiefs, you obviously get Rice back. You have Rice, Worthy, and Brown, 3 guys with, their own version of speed, where, Rice is more bursty, Worthy top end speed, and Hollywood Brown just very, very sneaky good speed, in my opinion, consistent speed. But looking at this team, I think that Travis Kelce is kind of back. Josh Simmons is out, which hurts them. But looking at this, that didn't really help the Chiefs last week. And I know a lot of people are wanting to say that, hey, the Chiefs paid off the refs type of thing. And I'm like, there wasn't that many penalties last week. And you can't say that the ones they called on Detroit would have... You can't say that, you know, the penalties were called would have swayed the game in the Lions' favor. Like, I'm just not convinced. So you kind of look at the Chiefs, and I think to myself, like, what a good game to have where you essentially can dominate a division foe and rise to over 500 for the first time this year. Now the Raiders, the problem that I really see with them is that it's like, is Geno going to be able to have that game without picks, or is Ashton Ginty going to be able to have a good rushing attack? We saw the Lions have a pretty decent rushing attack early last week, but then the Chiefs defense just got tired of it and they were shutting it down in the second half. So looking at their team, you know, Myers is questionable, and then they have Trey Tucker, Jack Beck, and Dante Thorne. And Brock Bowers is questionable. I think Brock Bowers would have to have an amazing game offensively in order to, like, keep them in it. But the thing about it is I cannot trust Geno Smith. I really can't, especially against this Kansas City defense and the O-line that he has. So I'm going with the Chiefs in this game. Eagles versus Vikings. This is a funny one because, as we know, the Eagles have lost 2 straight. They were undefeated, lost, you know, their first game the same week that the Bills did in week 5, and have since lost to the Giants last Thursday. So they had a lot of time to kind of mull over what is going on with their team, and I don't know whether to say that is going to help them. I don't think it helps when you go into Thursday against the Giants, a division foe, and they handle you the way they did. You cannot tell me things are better with the Eagles. It's wild to say because they don't have like any injuries. You know, Landon Dickerson is likely to play, questionable after, you know, missing a game or something like that. And then you look at, you know, Saquon not being able to get it going. Tyler Steen, the false starting accusations, you wonder if the league will crack down on that a little bit. And you wonder if Saquon can get going this game. I do think he has a chance to get going this game, if I'm being honest with you. Just because the Minnesota Vikings haven't had the best run defense. I think they really miss... what is his name? Last name... Phillips, I believe, is who they had. Was kind of their nose tackle. And obviously Jalen Redmond has been playing good this year, but there's been plays where I'm just like, where's the run defense from the Vikings? You have Jonathan Allen, Jalen Redmond, who, you know, undrafted came in and really popped off. And then, you know, Grenard, Wilson, Ivan Pace. Van Ginkel being out isn't a good thing to me, even though, you know, that gives Dallas Turner more snaps. And overall, to me, I just kind of look at the Vikings and I wonder, is there kryptonite this year, the run defense, which, you know, will doom them against Philadelphia. But is it going to be more of this where we're going to pass? I low-key think that even if the Vikings, who are obviously, you know, they're hosting this game, play their best, and obviously it is Carson Wentz against his former team. I think that Wentz, you know, is this really a revenge game? You know, they say JJ McCarthy isn't 100%. I don't think they're going to play him. So, you know, and it's fully trending that Wentz is going to play. Do we look at Wentz and think that, like, hey, he's going to be out for revenge? Obviously, it's not the same team or coaches or regime and that sort of thing. It's just a uniform at this point. But are they going to be able to pop off offensively? And I'm actually leaning more towards yes. And I think that Jefferson is going to prove he's going to have a great game. Obviously, Quinyon Mitchell has been playing pretty well, but I don't trust Adoree Jackson. Cooper DeJean to me has kind of disappeared this year. And I honestly think that Jordan Addison can get the better of him. And I'm not just saying that. I think that Naylor could have a big game. It's been kind of the kryptonite of the Eagles that like their third, cornerback, usually Adoree Jackson, has been getting sliced up, and even Kaylee Ringo's been getting sliced up when he's in. I just think that the Vikings, you look at Carson Wentz, and I think he's going to be mobile enough to keep himself protected. I think their O-line is good enough that they're going to be able to protect Wentz fairly well. And I'm actually going with the Vikings to win this game. Despite thinking like, man, wouldn't it be great for the Eagles to be able to beat the Vikings and put the Vikings in the gutter, so to speak. So I'm going with the Vikings, even though they are an underdog. Moving on to Panthers and Jets. I don't think there's a shot in heck that the Jets win this one. This was kind of looking to me like the game that, hey, you're up against a team that's struggling, but they're not really struggling anymore. And it's interesting because Chuba Hubbard is now back, and the Jets, to me, haven't been able to stop the run. They've had times when they just tend to give up a lot of yards for whatever reason. Now, last week against Denver, it was just a porous game, and I don't like to consider this kind of game into how, a team performs. But I'll say this, I do think it kind of showed that, Denver's got more problems than the Jets, and then you look at, the game against Dallas, and just some of the teams that they've played, they've just not looked good against the run, and it looks similar to last year. Give me the Panthers with Chuba coming back, Rico Dowdle off a heater, and I think that Bryce Young is really settling into his own with a solid cast of wide receivers with Tet McMillan, Leggett, Hunter Renfrow, and even Jatavion Sanders, beating out Tommy Tremble for the starting job. So, keep Bryce Young upright, and I think that, the defense is going to do a very good job of being able to defend against the Jets and essentially Garrett Wilson. Moving on, we have the Giants and the Broncos. This game looks interesting. It is in Mile High. Obviously, the Broncos, like I just said, I didn't really talk, I guess, about it. But you look at Denver, and they ultimately had a very, very tough time putting up any points last week. It's just bizarrely porous. Dobbins not playing well after he's been playing pretty well. Nix had played very, very well. The last two games were his best games of the season. And, this game, he just did not look good. And you win this ugly game over across the pond. Now, the defense to the Broncos is legit. I don't think there's any question that the way they play and what they're doing and the amount of sacks that they're getting is a fluke. There's just no way it's a fluke. They have a very, very good defense. Now, the Giants, thankfully, have Scatterboo, who's kind of willing to run against anything, which is the mentality you need when you're playing one of these stiff defenses. And I hope that they get Tyrone Tracy, active in the right way. But overall, I think that with Darius Slayton being doubtful, that does kind of suck. But I think that Jackson Dart has been throwing beautiful balls to whoever is in. Malik Neighbors, obviously being on IR and him still playing well, I think is a very big green light. And I think I'm going to surprise you guys. But with this pick, I'm picking the Giants. I think the Giants are going to come in, show who they are, and they're going to upset Denver. I know it sounds nuts to say, but I personally think that Denver just has kind of some of the woes. And the main reason I guess I'm going to pick these guys is I think that Brian Burns is having an incredible year. I think that Thibodeau is really, really stepping up. So you have, the trio of them and then Abdul Carter as their kind of, wild card that they put in occasionally on the edge. I think that this is a team that you don't want to meddle with. And then, not to mention Dexter Lawrence. And I think that you look at the defense, and I think Cordero Flott is playing very, very good. I think that, Tyler Nubin's playing very, very sound football, and I think that this team is tackling well, which I think is something that you need when you go up against a team like Denver, who they don't really throw deep, but they try to dip and dunk a lot. And overall, I think that it's going to be a lot tougher game for the Broncos than anybody is predicting. And the Giants can really give them a run for their money. And they just kind of have that it factor and that hot momentum that's wild and really hard to kind of contain, with Jackson Dart and Cam Skattebo kind of leading the way of this resurgence with the G-men. Moving on, we have Colts-Chargers. This is an interesting game. The Chargers, obviously, having lost, two of their last three, they beat Miami in a close game last week, where Miami, by all rights, could have won this game. Yeah, you have Vidal kind of emerge and be like, hey, I'm a guy you can use and rush for 124. Herbert throws for 264 after having two kind of, less than what you would want kind of games, where it passed for 166 and 203 the 2 weeks prior. But looking at Indy and obviously hosting them, I think this is a game where you make a statement win against Indianapolis, and overall maybe your team can finally make the defense look like how it looked early on. Obviously, looking at their team, you don't have Khalil Mack still. You have Odafe Oweh, who did get a sack last week, who you traded for, which, is very, very good. And then Tuipulotu, I think, has been playing very well as well. I think that this is a team that, has a sneaky good pass rush, and that's what you're going to need when you go to play the Colts, because the O-line for Daniel Jones has been giving him great protection. And it's obviously led by Quentin Nelson. And overall, they're very healthy. Yeah, they do have a couple of guys, I guess, on IR, but overall they're very healthy, and none of the guys playing have an injury designation or anything like that. Jonathan Taylor is playing very well, but I expect the Chargers to be able to, stack the box heavy, make Daniel Jones beat you. Obviously, his three top wide receivers, Pittman, Pierce, and then Adonai Mitchell, because Josh Downs is not playing this game. Obviously, Tyler Warren is something to consider with this game, but overall, I think the Chargers at home, I think they need to make it loud, and I think they need to unsettle Daniel Jones, and I think this team can do it with a little bit of the grit and fight that they kind of showed at the end of playing the Dolphins. So I'm going with the Chargers. Moving on, we have Commanders-Cowboys. A divisional matchup, obviously, where the Commanders last year, from what I remember, they took care of business against the Cowboys, but they didn't really play Dak last year. And this is obviously their first matchup this year. So looking at this, you have CeeDee Lamb back as Dallas, and Washington's obviously coming off a close loss against the Bears. I personally think that the Commanders it showed that they have a lot of glaring holes after the last game. It was bizarre. I think they should have run Kroski Merritt more against the Bears, and they did not do that, which I just don't understand, as the Bears haven't had a very good run defense this year. And he's proven time and time again that you should feed him quite a bit. Now, looking at them against the Cowboys, I do really think that they're going to need to lean on Kroski Merritt this time, or they are doomed to fail. And you look at the Cowboys, I think they have the 29th ranked run defense again, but are they going to do that? Scary Terry, yet again, is not playing in this game. So you have Debo, Luke McCaffrey, and Jalen Lane. You know, because Noah Brown is also on IR. So looking at this, you guys, I cannot say that there's a bone in my body that would think that the Commanders can win this game. I think Javonte Williams can cook for the Cowboys, but I honestly think that he's going to be just kind of icing on the cake. You're going to have CD and Pickens back, and you're going to really, really look like the team you need to be score-wise in order to actually try to make a run. And they are going to improve to 3-3-1 with week 7. So I'm picking the Cowboys despite however much that I want to pick the Commanders. And I just, you know, I wish I could pick the Commanders, but I just don't really feel like, you know, they're a team that's gonna win this game. You know, that they're obviously visiting Dallas as well. Now moving on to my Packers and Cardinals. So here's what I'll say briefly about what I think about my Packers after, you know, all the comments last week that they should have blown out the Bengals, they should have won by 21 points and all of this stuff. Did we, you know, all watch the same game on Thursday night, the Senior Bowl between Flacco and Rodgers? The second time that QBs over, you know, 40 or older duked it out after, you know, Breeze and Brady did years ago. We kind of saw, to me, that, you know, maybe the Bengals are a little bit of a different team with Flacco. So credit to my Green Bay Packers. And, you know, obviously the praise around Flacco has been that even before playing the Packers, you know, crazy good memory. And he was already making audibles that the coach wasn't telling him to make. And then they cooked the Steelers. Now, obviously, the Steelers, I think they kind of returned to where that defense is and that they're susceptible and that sort of thing. So, you know, do with that information what you will, but I personally feel as though the Bengals are a better team than we gave them credit for, and that you have a new identity with a new quarterback, and that if your team believes in the quarterback that's starting, which obviously the benching of Browning had a lot to do with, I personally think that, you know, my Packers played a really good game. You know, in hindsight, to the fact that, like, hey, the Bengals, they put up crazy numbers against the Steelers, and they made the Steelers look like, you know, one of the lowest paid defenses when they're the highest. But moving on to this matchup, we obviously have the Packers traveling down to Arizona, and Kyler Murray, I'm not sure if he is playing. I guess, you know, let me. You know, they're vague on whether Murray and Harrison are going to play. It, you know, that leads me to believe that they are going to play. Marvin Harrison doesn't even have an injury designation on their depth chart, you guys. And it's like Kyler Murray's questionable, and I fully expect him to be able to play. I think that they realize that if they put Brissett out there, he's likely getting murdered this game, as, you know, their O-line isn't the best, and they have Michael Carter as running back, and then Bam Knight as the backup. And you look at, you know, Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson, and then Zay Jones, and then Trey McBride. I do remember Trey McBride cooking my Packers the last time we played, and he was, you know, he was a very good, you know, he was a very, very good player for them in that game, to say the least, and he kept them in it. Now, my Packers, obviously Josh Jacobs finally got going, you know, against the Bengals, even though he had the flu, and I guess he puked during the game, before the game, and after. And overall, Love made a few throws, but they kind of lulled in the second half. But the thing that I think about with that is that, like, the Bengals went on like a 10-minute drive in the third quarter, so there wasn't really that much. And I guess notable injuries are that, Christian Watson is still out. They aren't activating him for this game. Dontavian Wicks is questionable, but then and Zach Tom as well. So looking at this, and Devontae Wyatt is also out. So you're going to have Colby Wooden and then Carl Brooks starting on the D line for the Packers. So looking at this, and I guess the other interesting thing is that they have moved Carrington Valentine to be the starting right corner for this game, and they have made Nate Hobbs a backup. Javon Bullard was cleared. He had like a concussion kind of scare, but it really wasn't, I guess, anything. And then you look at kind of the defense for the Cardinals. Now, Josh Sweat, Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Darius Robinson, to me, are going to be tough guys to run against. Calais Campbell, I don't say it enough, but this guy is an ageless wonder of the league. He's the oldest, like, non-QB, I think. That's not a kicker or something like that. And the dude is playing, to win these games. And I'll be real, the Cardinals, they do have an underrated, like, defense. I don't think everyone gives their defense enough props and that sort of thing. And obviously you look at kind of, Max Melton in their DB room, but I think that Max Melton is going to try and cook this game because he's obviously playing against his brother, who's converted to the same position of cornerback, this offseason, and he's going to have something to prove. It's obviously a factor that, a sibling rivalry, like, you better know that it's on. I am still going to pick my Packers because I really don't believe that much in Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison. I don't think Marvin Harrison has really proven to me that he can be that guy, the guy they need him to be, the dude they drafted hella early to give Kyler Murray, potentially his best weapon of all time, but he hasn't been that. So I'm going with my Packers. I think that, it could be a really tough game, but I think that my Packers are, kind of ready to maybe quiet the crowd a little bit and improve to being a 4-1-1 team. Moving on to Sunday night, we have Falcons and Niners. The Falcons obviously proved me dreadfully wrong last week, and they finally kind of channeled what their offense could be. And Bijan has been having a crazy good year. Tyler Algier, what a beast. Obviously, we know that the Bills don't have the best defense, and it's becoming very apparent that, to me, Josh Allen isn't going to be able to just carry that team. I think that you look at the Falcons, and obviously they did very, very, very well. They got hot early, and they didn't let off the brakes. And their defense is playing very, very, very well, where obviously they addressed pass rush with James Pierce, Leonard Floyd, Jalen Walker, who is unfortunately out this game, and then Arnold Ebiketie. And overall, Brock Purdy is out this game, and Mac Jones, his magic kind of wore off. It kind of wore off last week. So they're obviously traveling to San Fran across the country, quite a trip. And you got Mac Jones, but you don't have Ricky Pearsall this game. And so it's Jawan Jennings and Kendrick Bourne. And I do like how Kendrick Bourne has been playing, but you're very, very shallow on wide receiver. Like, you have Jawan Jennings, Kendrick Bourne, DeMarcus Robinson, and then Sky Moore. And Jordan Watkins, and that is your wide receiver room. Personally, I think that you look at San Fran's kind of depth chart, and they have struggled a little bit on their O-line. Obviously, we know that Trent Williams is a baller, and he's one of the best, if not the best, left tackle in the league. But overall, to me, it just the rest of their line is to be desired. They just haven't really, Ben Barch getting injured, I don't think helped them at all. You obviously have Spencer Burford, who's, listed as a backup here on IR type of thing, but overall, I just don't trust the O-line, and I think that you look at the Falcons, and I'm going to side with them despite their inconsistencies. I think that it's really going to hurt the Niners, and I don't want to talk about this much because it does pain me that Fred Warner is obviously out for the year. So who is the leader of this defense? Is it going to be Michael Williams? Is he going to take up the reins as a rookie to be like, yeah, we need to prove that we're still here and that we're not just going to lay over to any teams? But you lose guys like Bosa and then Fred Warner, and it's like, it's like, who is going to step up and is going to be the leader of this team? And it pains me to say, because Saleh really came in here and he was like, I'm going to prove that I'm still a top defensive coordinator in this league after having the Jets perform the way they did before he got fired a couple, last year. And it's just, but is it going to be enough? So I tentatively pick the Falcons because they've definitely not helped me in the past when I've picked them, if I'm being honest with you. And while I think that Mac Jones and Kendrick Bourne and maybe Jawan Jennings can create some magic, I just don't see it, because I think that the Falcons with AJ Terrell, with Jesse Bates, with Xavier Watts and, Mike Hughes, and then, obviously, they're nickelback Mike Ford because Billy Bowman is out. But I think that this defense has been playing very, very well for the Falcons. And I just don't think that the Niners, on their limited opportunities, are going to be able to compete. So those are my picks, you guys, for Sunday's games. I want you to tell me what you think. Tell me if you think I'm crazy for picking teams like the Giants, the Saints, over, the Broncos and the Bears. But in all honesty, I'm not a believer of the Bears, and I think that, hopefully we'll see when they go up against a real team, because in all honesty, I don't know if the Commanders are a real team this year. They've looked very rough and not consistent to me, where Jaden Daniels is playing pretty well, but they're not able to close games and their defense is very sus. But I want to thank you all for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.